This episode of the Media Leader podcast is brought to you by TiVo OS, the content-first independent smart TV operating system that's bringing new monetization opportunities to market. Find out more at TiVo.com. What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? I'm Jack Benjamin, senior reporter for the Media Leader.
And I'm Omar Oakes, editor-in-chief of the Media Leader.
This week we'll be discussing Sky's upfronts, Ofcom's BBC report, strikes at Guardian Media Group, and more. But first, given this is our last weekly podcast planned for the year, I thought it would be good to reflect on the past year's worth of media stories and big trends. Well, Omar, here we are. I'm sad to say this is your last episode of the weekly news podcast that we've been running now for, what's it been, a year and a half, 2 years?
Wow.
How long has it been?
It feels like, I don't know if it feels like it's longer or shorter, but the time has flown by. It's been really fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Any other reflections before you go on your merry way to other pastures?
I think I've been generally pleasantly surprised by when I announced that I was leaving at the beginning of October, just the amount of people who've been so generous with their time and advice for, it's kind of scary. I've got a couple of weeks left and it's kind of scary the nearer I get to the end date. But wow, I'm going to wake up next month and I'm not going to have a full-time salary job. And I've been just so thankful for other consultants, people who've done this, being reassuring and full of lots of great advice, which I've already taken on board a lot of it. And it just kind of fills me with encouragement about the future of this industry. There's still a huge amount of really talented, thoughtful, kind, generous people in this industry. And if anything, they don't get enough airtime. And I feel like the Media Leader, something I've been really proud of, I do feel we've really showcased a lot of people in this industry who are maybe behind the scenes in the world of advertising and media, but without them, this industry just wouldn't happen, and it wouldn't be nearly as successful as it is. And I think the Media Leader holds a really important place in showcasing the really important work that these people do. And it's cliche that if you ask anyone how they came into this industry, they say, "Oh, I just kind of fell into it." And it's because I think it generally attracts really smart, thoughtful people who are kind of not wedded to a particular view of how to live life. They're just really open-minded. And I just, in my new kind of life as a consultant freelancer, I really hope to meet more of those people.
So, Omar, why don't you kick us off? What would you say has been, if you had to name one, the big trend in 2024 in media?
The big trend. Wow, starting off strong. Very many. Starting off strong, Jack. You know what I'm not going to miss when I leave the Media Leader in a couple of weeks is kind of these big questions that I'm going to struggle to answer within 2 minutes or whatever the expectation is. Okay, all right. So I think it has been a year of two halves. I think the first half of the year was really, really difficult. I think we saw lots of advertising budgets being frozen, lot of uncertain planning ahead for media owners, businesses generally, advertisers in wait and see mode, particularly in anticipation of the UK general election, US presidential election, what was going to happen.
The October budget as well.
Yeah, I'll get to that. You get to Cannes Lions in June. That's always, for many reasons, Cannes is good to go to. But from a reporting point of view, it's always that midpoint of the year. And particularly when you're in an environment where lots of agency heads and media owner execs, they're in a chatty mood. The big vibe from June was it felt like the brakes were starting to come off and they felt like H2 was going to be a lot better. And then off the back of that, we had a really busy summer. So even though kind of people go on holiday in July and August, it felt like a really busy kind of active things. It felt like the brakes have been taken off in August and I guess in September as well. And then you get to Q4 now where it's supposed to be the most busiest, Christmas festive period driven time of year. And it's kind of gone a bit flat, quiet again. And you mentioned the October budget in the UK. I think there's been a real dour mood around the UK since Starmer's bedded in, and in the US, I think a lot of shock and genuine dismay at not just Donald Trump coming back into office next year, but the scale of the victory and the realization that it's probably going to be a lot worse than it was in his first term. So a lot more uncertainty about what lies ahead. And that has that. By the way, that hasn't been reflected in the stock market, which has loved it.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
but even that in itself is a kind of flashing warning light as well, because the US indices are heavily dominated by big tech, and they're anticipating tax cuts next year. They're generally more resistant to inflation because, Google, Facebook, they're all kind of respective monopolies to an extent in their fields. And I think what's also been shocking for the media owner community as well is to see Elon Musk really come to the fore, to the point where he's parading himself as like Donald Trump's fourth wife now. It's quite a sight to see.
It's like a VP, but not the actual VP. But yeah. I haven't heard very much from JD Vance, and I've heard a whole lot from Elon Musk.
Yeah. Well, as we know from all Donald Trump's marriages, it will end in disaster. But, to see one of the world's strongest brands, over the last kind of 15 years, Twitter, now being completely abused, even more than it was, just kind of offering money to people who were going to vote for Trump and just completely putting his thumb on the scale in terms of pro-anti Republican Democrat content. It's just worsened trust even more in social media, if you even thought that was possible. And so I think when we come to the end of this year, you see this exodus of people kind of leaving Twitter to go on, before it was Mastodon and now it's Blue Sky as flavor of the month. There'll probably be something else next year. We had last week the Ofcom Online Nation estimating that Twitter/X has lost 6 million users in the UK since Musk took over. I mean, that's quite extraordinary. And I think really a lot of people, we've been talking about it on this podcast in our publication for a while, but I think it's really come to the mainstream now where people have realized how harmful and addictive social media is. And Elon Musk, he already drove the advertisers away. Now he's really driving the users away. And the common thread is, it's not just that it's harmful for you. I think people are realizing, moreover, that is it actually that useful for your life? The advertisers don't see a great ROI on it. They never did, but it was seen as like a hygiene thing to have in your media plan. And now I think a lot of normal people who've been on Twitter to see what's going on in the news, see what Stephen Fry or whatever celebrity's talking about, they're seeing that it's actually not that worthwhile.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the move to Blue Sky has been compelling to me as a journalist. And I think you really saw that yesterday, actually, when there was a whole crisis in South Korea with martial law declared and then undeclared in a span of a few hours. And Blue Sky was actually the place where there were lots of live posting from journalists on the ground there, immediately getting the news. And so if you wanted to be plugged in, that felt like very old school Twitter. And so I'm not saying that there aren't issues with social media, and we'll get onto that, I'm sure, at some point later in the conversation. But that, who knows, maybe there is hope yet for some of these alternatives, maybe for the Federation idea that Blue Sky, Mastodon, even Threads is in on Federation from Meta. We could be entering a slightly different era. But Twitter X has been a major trend this year. I'm glad you brought up uncertainty around the US election. I wanted to just flag a few extra things looking into next year that I think are going to become very important in 2025. For one, apart from market uncertainty that could be caused by tariffs and just general macroeconomic policy coming out of the US and having an effect around the world, which could then weigh on businesses and therefore marketing budgets, it's worth remembering a couple of Trump's cabinet nominations that could have an impact on media. So one, Kash Patel, who's Trump's pick to run the FBI, has said he wants to aggressively go after journalists and use the powers of the state to do that, which is extremely concerning.
This is the guy that wants to close the Hoover building.
Does he? I hadn't read that.
Doesn't he just want to completely...
It's an ugly building. It's a brutalist building.
But he just wants to completely scale down the activities of the FBI.
Right.
And
Well, that
like,
sounds like a common thread with a lot of his appointments is appoint someone who wants to dismantle the institution that they are then in charge of.
Yeah, if you're a terrorist wanting to do another 9/11, it's just like you're rubbing your hands.
God. Jesus. The other pick that is also concerning for media is Brendan Carr. That's Trump's nomination from the FCC. He said he wants to aggressively go after tech giants over issues like free speech that, conservatives have been arguing for many years that they were silenced in 2020 and 2021. And
they're so silenced, yet we never stop hearing from them.
Yeah, and they're so silenced that a billionaire bought Twitter and turned it into a far-right platform. But anyway, so that's his plan. He also, there's consideration around revoking broadcast licenses in the U.S. as well. So, broadcast news like ABC News, which fact-checked Trump during the one presidential debate earlier this year, they could be in trouble. So there's a lot of uncertainty, frankly, around press freedom, I think, in the U.S. that we haven't really talked about much, certainly at the media leader yet, but also the broader market, as you mentioned, doesn't seem yet concerned about all of this in terms of at least the stock market, business, financial market. And there's so much uncertainty that I think in the early months of January, we'll start to get some clarity around exactly how bad things could get for things like press freedom in the U.S., for things like just the general state of the global economy. So definitely some things to watch. But again, moving us back to reflect back on 2024, there were a couple other trends that I noticed that I wanted to get your take on as well. So we've talked about big tech, and they have already come under the gun a little bit this year. Google is now officially a monopolist. We learned that earlier in the year over its search business. There's another trial ongoing that's supposed to have a decision done by the end of the year around its ad tech, whether or not it's an ad tech monopoly. Apple has also drawn attention from EU regulators, UK regulators. Meta's drawn attention just as well. Clearly, this year seemed like a step up in terms of we actually need to start regulating some of these big tech companies. I don't know if you had any additional thoughts, especially as we look into next year around big tech regulation, because we're about to get lots of ad forecast reports, and most ad spend growth has been funneled to some of these big platforms like Meta, like Google, Amazon as well. A lot of these are coming from small and medium-sized businesses as opposed to necessarily big advertisers that are working with agencies. But I saw this as one of the big stories of 2024.
Yeah, I think so. And, you mentioned the FCC before. I think you really have to credit Lena Khan, who I think maybe hasn't had a perfect record, but actually has been willing to actually step up when it comes to investigating Amazon in particular, but more generally creating a culture of getting serious about regulation in the US around tech-based monopolies, and actually getting away from this whole 1980s Reagan era Justice Brandeis view of competition that you can it's only about artificially raising prices. Now, monopolists, particularly in a digital online world where you give out stuff for free and you monetize ads around it, that you have to look at market share and you have to look at market effects more importantly. So I think it's been really positive. I hope that the US institutions, the Justice Department, the courts, I hope they're strong enough to withstand this potential tsunami of fascism that's about to be unleashed next year. And, Musk leading the charge in terms of the kleptocrats, the plutocrats, who are hoping to kind of keep Trump sweet by whatever means necessary. I think, but as you say, it's potentially positive. I just hope the air doesn't come out of the balloon next year.
Another big trend looking at in terms of TV is that streaming services became profitable by and large in 2024 for the first time, unless you're perhaps Netflix. All these other streaming services like Warner Brothers Discovery's different DTC services, namely Max, Disney's Disney Plus / Hulu combination, they all became profitable. And meanwhile, linear TV did not certainly didn't have a good time in 2023 and likely didn't have a very good time this year in terms of the linear TV ad market. I'm curious what you make of the changing TV market that we saw in 2024, and presumably some of these services are likely to stay profitable going forward unless it's completely mismanaged. So I imagine for advertisers that have shown us a high degree of interest in things like Amazon Prime Video things like Disney Plus, in things like Netflix, now that they all have ads, that this is a trend that will probably be continuing.
Yeah, I mean, big macro long-running trend is obvious. People have moved from linear TV consumption to streaming. But what's interesting about the profitability is it's come at a time where you feel like things have settled down after the pandemic, when during the pandemic, everyone's stuck at home, starting to binge watch TV. Everyone started to get into the streaming game to catch up to Netflix, in particular Disney and Paramount. And now we've seen that they're apparently, according to the earnings, they are now profitable, those streaming services, whereas Netflix has been profitable for a while. Now, is it down to much more revenue? Yes, a bit. Is it down to costs being cut? Yes, I think that's what's actually been happening this year, that cost cuts have been feeding in, so they are more profitable now. That's obviously not sustainable for the long run. We've seen that Netflix has been able to develop a market-leading position because, with the exception of Disney, it just has this huge commissioning budget. But different to Disney, it has been able to leverage commissions all over the world and actually leverage, quite interesting projects, whether it's Squid Game, whether it's Money Heist, South Korea, Spain, and actually leverage, build up big regional offerings, as opposed to Disney, which is just, everyone loves Marvel and everyone loves Star Wars. So it's two competing strategies we're seeing on the global streaming front in terms of content, which is really important. Now the interesting one is Paramount. I mean, you saw, I think early this week, Bloomberg reported that David Ellison, this very young Larry Ellison child that's now running Paramount, he's considering selling off divisions. He's gonna kind of smash CEO roles together, the big CEO roles. That's going to be a really interesting one, whether it continues down the strategy of, okay, we're gonna make a real go out of Paramount Plus. We're gonna have try to make a big profitable streaming platform. We've seen the issues that Warner Brothers Discovery has had with its own Max platform. You might be looking at a Sony, for example, which isn't involved in this at all. It's very happy to have its own production studio and actually kind of is willing to kind of get involved in licensing deals. We've seen that. I think what's going to continue to happen is you're going to have a big secondary streaming market where, with the exception of Netflix, Disney, Amazon, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Sony, they're all kind of like swapping content with each other. They're all doing these deals. I think we're going to continue to see a lot more of that because they're all going to be cost conscious, and they're not going to retain profitability, I don't think, by being able to massively increase revenue over the next few years. There's only so many streaming services you can have. There's still worries about inflation. I think they're going to be keeping a tight lid on costs. But who knows what's going to happen with M&A, which could shake up the Etch-a-Sketch and make the market look more different.
I was going to say, especially under new leadership in the US, there could be more consolidation. I think David Zaslav, I'm pretty sure he's a buddy of Trump, or at least has been seen talking to his associates and Trump, has said that under a new administration there might be more possibility for M&A and consolidation. And of course, Warner Brothers Discovery came out of Warner Media and Discovery, and Warner Media itself had consolidated previously in another life. I mean, there's just concepts. It's M&A all the way down, isn't it? So the question is whether or not that can continue in the TV space, and that could be good for consumers. To your point about people can't afford necessarily all these subscription services, but if that doesn't happen, I would imagine to see a lot. We'll see a lot more bundling of these different services together, and we started seeing that this year as well for the first time. And so it's definitely a trend worth watching. In terms of other more traditional media, I'm curious what you make of the likes of Out of Home, which had growth in the UK this year, audio, but also publishing, which has had, I think, a particularly difficult year, especially compared to maybe some of the other traditional mediums, which have been at least able to tread water, if not grow modestly in 2024.
I think, Out of Home has actually been one of the most successful sectors in the UK anyway, because you've seen generally people return to offices a bit more. That trend is likely to continue into next year. I mean, we've seen Amazon telling people to go back to the office 5 days a week. That'll be interesting to see how people react to that long term. I think you are also seeing just more interest in digital out of home in terms of what it can do going forward as a medium of programmatic targeting, but also creative as well. Just quietly behind the scenes, a lot of the inventory has been replaced by newer high definition screens, and it won't be long before you see more sites like Piccadilly Lights where you can see these kind of like cool. Is it anamorphic? I always forget the jargon. You know, when it feels
Sort
like
of
the
3D
hand is
type.
coming out and it's going to hit you in the face. You know,
3D out of home.
Yeah, it's not 3D. I don't like that term, but you know what I mean. It looks like it's coming towards you.
Yeah.
So out of home potentially getting quite interesting, and it's not been easy for just on out of home. It's not been easy for them as well because another interesting thing that happened during the pandemic was the TV companies led by ITV. They got rid of advanced booking deadlines. So it used to be that you had to book on TV and not get penalized, pay extra if you had to book 8 weeks in advance. And they got rid of that during the pandemic because, they accepted that kind of as a volatile situation, spend was going up, going down quickly. And then they just decided afterwards, things return to normal, that, actually, we're just not going to return to that. It's actually had a follow-on effect to other sectors, principally out of home, where if you're a big advertiser, you kind of say, okay, we're going to invest in TV, we're going to invest in out of home and other offline media. You get rid of the advanced booking deadlines for TV, and it's actually meant that you're getting a lot of late money coming onto out of home more than before. And it's actually been quite difficult for the likes of JCDecaux, Ocean Outdoor, Clear Channel to adjust to that. So when they kind of get, it's usually a lot of these luxury advertisers want to do something really cool, but they have an idea that they want to activate in 3 weeks' time. It puts a lot of pressure on the out-of-home companies, some of which come up with a creative solution themselves. This is an ad agency doing it. So they've actually done pretty well to adapt to that. And if you look at the AA Walk figures, I think out-of-home was the only channel outside of something like search which was forecast to have a double-digit increase. So they're doing well.
So some hope for more traditional channels, especially as they make the digital transition. But looking ahead to next year, I'm curious, especially with regard to publishing, because I know that this is, as a journalist yourself and as a journalist myself, this is something we think about. What do you think the publishing industry has to do next year to start facing some of these headwinds that they've been dealing with over the past year, thinking about Google AI overviews potentially affecting traffic, other changes to Google search affecting traffic, social media, the BBC even apparently having an impact on local news in the UK. This is according to Ofcom's latest report that we'll talk about later. There's lots going on with publishing, and I'm just curious, especially as we've talked about some of our early predictions for 2025 and what might happen or what we need to pay attention to. I feel like this is a space that we definitely need to watch more.
Well, you take the lead in covering platforms and publishers for us. I will say something, but what do you think? What do you think?
Well, it's been a difficult year to remain, I think, optimistic about a lot of the business success, commercial success of a number of publishers. And we've seen that play out across whether it's local and regional titles or whether it's even big national titles or even international titles out of the US or the UK going to the US. There's been some success in that area as well, but it's not been easy. There's clearly an interest among consumers to get their news more from different social platforms. Maybe they don't necessarily care to trust an established news brand when they go there, but they are fine trusting individual news influencers, many of whom do not take the same steps that journalists and editorial staff would take when checking and verifying facts and information. We've seen, and as I mentioned, we've seen huge traffic effects potentially from changes made from different tech platforms. I think the optimistic note that I've heard all year from publishers is, especially with things like AI becoming more and more used around the internet, that there would be a flight to trust, that trusted news brands, established news brands would receive more interest from people because they know that they can find verified information there. Whether or not we actually see that consumer behavior play out is remains to be seen. I'm not as optimistic, I think, as some editors of papers have expressed that they think that that's going to happen.
So recently we've had a couple of reports. Yeah, we've had a couple of reports this year that have told really interesting stories about trust and news. The first one was this Newsworks. Did it come from Newsworks about young people?
Yes, that's right.
I forget.
New research recently.
Was it Dentsu did this with them? I forget which company did this research with them. Forgive me. But the headline was, young people are way more interested in news than you think. But to your point, I think there is, and we've seen this again with the US election, there is a deep unease the younger you are as a person. In general, there is a deep unease with getting your information from what is loosely called corporate media. And that's across the political spectrum, whether you're talking about Fox News, GB News in the UK, The Sun, The Times, whether you're talking about MSNBC, liberal media, the Guardian in the UK. I think there is a general unease from getting information from what is supposed to be a mainstream news brand that has a political slant. And you're seeing generally younger people, to your point, actually seek out biased media on social and choosing to make up their own mind. Now, that's obviously problematic. That's obviously a problematic strategy as a news consumer. But I think we've really come to the point where, we had 50 years ago where the Washington Post, set this high benchmark for investigative journalism. They brought down a president. If it wasn't for Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, my God, I'm getting old. Woodward and Bernstein. You wouldn't have brought down a president who was lying and really thought that once the president is elected, he's a king, right? And the dismantling of Richard Nixon, led by the Washington Post reporting, was not just a victory for the news industry, it was a victory for democracy and the world's biggest democracy, that, no person is above the law. You fast forward to today, almost, 50 years later, and the Washington Post is led by a tech billionaire who's told its editorial team that, nah, you can't endorse the Democrat for president. We're not doing that. Now, there's two things. Number one is kind of just the abysmal decline of the Washington Post as an institution, which is a really sad day for the news industry. It's supposed to be a standard bearer, and it's completely failed to live up to that and its history. But also this feeling again of, well, where in terms of mainstream brands, where am I getting it from? I can't really trust the editorial teams to be making editorial decisions without fear and favor and actually trusting me, a thinking member of the audience who just wants quality information. You constantly feel like the thumb is being put on the scale. So if the thumb is being put on the scale, then I'm gonna go to those brands which are explicit about where they're coming from. I'm gonna go to a Joe Rogan because I know where that guy's coming from. I'm gonna go to a Russell Brand, and it's usually, unfortunately, young men who are responding to male influencers. But I think that is an unfortunate and potentially very pernicious trend that we're going to continue to see. And if we're going to continue to have standard bearers for the news industry just fail in their responsibility to stand up for the only people who matter, the audience. It's not the advertisers, it's not politicians, it's the audience. And if you lose sight of that, then it doesn't matter, frankly, whether you're a news publication that puts out written content and you transition to video, as a lot of them are doing, if you transition to kind of doing cool stuff on social and podcasts and all this stuff, it doesn't matter. It's the content itself which always matters in the long run. And I think that too many news publishers in particular have completely lost sight of that.
I think it's challenging because I think you actually inadvertently bring up an issue that publishers have, news publishers have, which is that Bezos at the Washington Post had exercised control over the editorial team. But there's never been any evidence, and that is included at least in terms of what happened in the run-up to the election, that Bezos was influencing the newsroom, and that these are two separate teams that don't even talk to each other, really, at the Washington Post or at any news organization worth a damn in the U.S., certainly. But that lack of knowledge does not but that does not get communicated to the average consumer. They aren't necessarily aware of the distinction between an editorial team and a newsroom, between the op-ed page and the actual breaking news section, let's say. And part of that is because it's all been collapsed online, and you don't actually have a physical paper where the opinions are at the end, and you can literally tear them out of the paper if you don't want to even see them in there. So there is that issue. I think publishers struggle when we talk about the issues of trust. I think you're exactly right. I don't think it's a fair thing to perceive news publishers as just as trustworthy as some influencer Joe Schmo or Russell Brand online.
Of course not.
But there is the perception issue of, Bezos owns the Post. I can't trust anything that is published, even if the newsroom is truly independent. Same goes for the LA Times, which has its own ownership issue. Same goes for loads of different outlets broadcast news in the US as well. So I don't know how they go about tackling this. I think you're right that ultimately it comes down to just providing really great content, but that used to be a bigger draw. And now if you put out a breaking news story, it's cycled around 1 million different other publications online that may or may not be linking back to your original story anyway. So there is I think most people don't necessarily care where they're receiving the news as long as they know someone reported it that's worth a damn to them. And I'm not sure how you actually solve for that.
Well, the vast majority of newsrooms are getting their news from agency copies anyway.
Yes, that's true.
Reuters, AP, etc. So they're the ones that have made the decisions to get rid of reporters. You go into any national newsroom right now and you'll see how quiet it is. There are very few reporters who are in there, and they're not out there kind of pounding the streets of the country and chasing down stories. There are going to be a lot of people who are, get mad at me for saying this, but it's true. You look at any newsroom compared to 20 years ago, and they're just quieter places. They generally have adopted to short-term tactics where they double down on a core readership that of politically leaning, we're a left-wing paper, we're a right-wing paper, and we're just going to double down on that to protect ourselves. But there's no kind of long-term vision about, in a digital environment when there's so much noise, how do we stand out as a signal among that noise? And, I just think that, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm leaving, so I will anyway. But I think, trade media, of which, I've been involved in for now 10 years, I just think trade media is in a really great place going forward. Because while you have people who are going out there and seeking their own news from influencers, as biased as that may be, you're also going to have people who are seeking out quality sources of information. And the realization will cascade down that, if I want to know about what's going on in the tech industry, then I'm going to go to TechCrunch, Wired, or even better publications than that, where I've got kind of specialists who, Wired isn't giving political opinions. They're not going around endorsing political candidates. Why is any newspaper endorsing a political candidate? It's a nonsense. It's all a game to kind of curry favor and get access to politicians, and the readers don't. You'll talk to so many Daily Mail readers in this country who are like, I know I don't agree with the politics, but I just really like the lifestyle section and all the rest of it. The Daily Mail is a very good newspaper in a lot of ways, and readers appreciate that. It's not just all about the politics, but the politics is just this screaming kind of thing which has this awful patina all over the brand, and they need to get away from that. And I think it's really good for specialist media, whether it's consumer magazines, specialist magazines, or B2B trade. I think that people will always seek out quality content.
And from a commercial standpoint, I suppose if there is some optimism to be had, and bring this sort of full circle, it's that if big tech companies are regulated, if if Google is forced to actually pay publishers, or Meta is forced to pay publishers for content that they then cite or use, whether it's an AI overview answers or otherwise just putting on search pages, then there could be a more competitive environment for news publishers, especially specialist publishers, if people are making queries that are a bit more specific, right? So yeah, looking ahead, it's going to be a very interesting 2025, I imagine, for the publishing industry, as with lots of other media channels. Any other last thoughts as we go into 2025 that you want to mention?
Well, we haven't talked about AI yet, but AI is kind of slowly kind of broadening its tentacles all over the industry. And even yesterday, I was using ChatGPT to do a spell check of this little report.
A spell check?
Yeah, just a spell check. Just a
Does spell check not work well enough on Word?
Yeah, but it doesn't always. This is interesting in itself. It doesn't always kind of get the context when you want to kind of
right.
It's like sometimes you will spell something correctly, but you didn't actually. I've been caught by that so many times where I'm struggling to think of an example, but the spell check isn't good enough on its own. But actually, I was testing it. I had to summarize a shorter version of something I'd written, and I'm like, let's just check. I got ChatGPT just to do something that I'd done myself already. And I thought that ChatGPT actually did a better job. So that's a fail for me. But I think I'm optimistic that there's a lot of people who are playing with LLMs and a lot of products which are due to come on stream using generative AI. That could be, we've come through the hype cycle where everyone was crazy about it 2 years ago. And then people was like, oh, it's all overblown. And now we're coming to that good point. It's like the middle of a cigarette. Where you're kind of like that sweet spot where you're just
we don't condone smoking necessarily.
No, but if we did, it's that bit where actually we can see the benefits, realistic, tangible benefits are actually going to save us lots of time.
There's lots of interesting things in AI. The rise of AI agents is something that we're going to be looking at in the new year. The rise of AI agents is going to be an interesting thing in the new year to watch, because you basically have the ability, you don't have to necessarily know how to code anything to get a computer to do something bespoke or novel to you. So if I wanted to, let's say, create a website as a young journalist or an independent media owner, I can basically just tell in English, plain language, what I want from a website, and that can be created for me. And there's loads of this type of thing, like creative imagery that is being used, especially by small and medium-sized businesses on tech platforms, right? It really will democratize or otherwise collapse a lot of the creative professional industry potentially. So I don't know how the industry is going to respond to all these different things. We already saw tensions about this earlier in the year with especially like ITV creating a TV ad with AI, and then there was that job posting as well. That was, I think, was ultimately taken down, wasn't it? I think you wrote about this for us. So I think we're going to see more of that tension played out in 2025. But these things have moved slower than I think some people thought. ChatGPT is now 2 years old, and it's not like it's completely taken everyone's job yet, or necessarily even been adequately integrated into workplace behavior by most companies and most employees at those companies. And people are still working out exactly how they want to use the current tools, let alone the tools that are currently in development.
Yeah, but it does get you thinking in realistic ways about how things will change. Who knows how quickly, but you feel like there is an inevitability that wasn't there even a year ago. So it's interesting you mentioned about the prospect of you don't even need to code things. You can just ask an LLM using just normal language, make me this, or build me a website using this kind of design sensibility, and it will just create something for you. And kind of thinking about my upcoming freelance consultancy career, you start thinking about things like, okay, do I need to like build a website? And you start thinking, oh, do I need to outsource this particular thing? And just the prospect of AI doing a lot of this stuff for you You got a lot of the advice over the last 5 years from, entrepreneurs or small businesses is like, you need to learn to code so you don't get ripped off by computer programmers and this, that, and the other. And it's just really helpful for you to know. And all of that advice gets thrown out the window when you can just get an LLM to do it for you.
Yeah, there's less need for outsourcing. So that would help sort of the entrepreneurial spirited people. But then that could also hurt lots of different industries, especially cottage industries or other freelancers that might be making work, irregularly from people that just sort of outsource work to them, right? So we haven't worked through exactly what this is going to look like, obviously. And in media, lots of people like to say, well, it'll free up, lots of executives, I should say, like to say that AI will free up more time for people to focus on more important work as opposed to, the drudgery of the day to day. But whenever someone talks about more efficiency and freeing up time, I'm always a little skeptical if they don't mean actually we could be cutting costs here and reducing staff, especially depending on the growth of an industry as it goes forward, whether or not, in order to remain profitable, that becomes more of a business necessity. I think it's something that everyone needs to be mindful of.
Well, it's that old idea, that Schumpeter idea about creative destruction, isn't it? Because in the long run, machines have been very good at replacing people and freeing up, air quotes, people to do kind of like higher level things as we move towards this Karl Marx utopia of us all kind of like spending our days being artists and all the rest of it. The problem is, number one, you have the short term, a lot of short term losers. People just can't retrain at the drop of a hat to do. You used to have to. The old thing was like, I can't just like leave my kind of job as a software engineer to become a computer programmer, and now you can't even go into computer programming jobs because AI is going to do it all for you. So what are the actual kind of like high level jobs that people are going to be doing? I think generally it kind of favors more creative people because, the cliche is it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's somebody who knows how to use AI better than you who's going to take your job. So I think generally people who are more creative and entrepreneurial are going to win out. But also I think the education system has a lot to answer for as well, because I think you are moving to a model where there's just no getting around it. You talk about people losing their jobs. We are moving to a world where there are going to be less companies are just going to need fewer people. And we're just going to have a more flexible labor market where people are probably going to be moving around a lot more as businesses needs change. But you still need to have creative specialists, particularly in information economy, who know how to sell ideas rooted in culture. That's the great thing about advertising and media. You have people who are generally interested in people, they're interested in culture, they're interested in the way those things interact. And I think actually it's quite good news for people that work in this industry who are adaptable, as opposed to maybe people who have had careers in retail or, dare I say, law, accountancy. AI is coming for a lot of those functions in those industries too. People who have got technical skills, but maybe they're not easily adaptable to how do I sell myself as somebody who can augment what an AI does. I think it's, on a relative basis, it could be quite good news, relatively, for people who work in this industry.
I want to move us along to talk about more recent news over the past week, as we normally do. There were a couple other news stories from the past week that I thought deserved some added attention. We'll tick them off one by one quickly. First, Sky Media ads chief Priya Dogra addressed underpayments of ad revenue to clients dating back to 2017 at last week's upfronts. She pledged to, quote unquote, drive change and admitted the issues did not rise to Sky's standards. Omar, you were there. You attended the upfronts. I'm curious what some of your main takeaways were, including your reaction to her comments.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting her to actually say something like that. Perhaps I should have done in retrospect. I'm not a comms professional. But she didn't apologize, by the way. It's like, sorry for underpaying you, Paramount, for years and years. But she said that this fell well below our standards. And we should of course say that these issues have been going back to before News International sold News International, News Corp sold Sky to Comcast. So it's there was a bit of an uncomfortableness, I think. But you understand why she had to do it. So those upfronts, what else happened? So they had a bit of talent. They wheeled out some sports people, Michael Richards, Laura Robson, and a rugby person, Mr. Flatman. I've forgotten his first name. Sorry. Was talking about presenting, which was okay, but that was as far as it went really on the kind of talent. So it kind of for an upfronts, it comes from the old school idea of US kind of broadcasters like showing all their content slate for next year and getting advertisers excited and wanting to buy stuff upfront for next year. So you can't really call it an upfronts, but they did anyway. What was really, really interesting, genuinely, was some of the forward-facing technical stuff they were talking about, particularly this person, Anthony Davies, who is Sky/Comcast's global head of design. And he was talking about how apparently they were pitching the idea of a Sky Glass more than 10 years ago, making a big bet on the future. They're all TV in the future. It's not going to have cables. It's all going to be, Wi-Fi internet, and all content is going to be delivered through apps. And it was inspired by, there were rumors of Apple launching a TV after having just launched the iPads and the iPhone before it, ITV, not ITV, obviously, but, iPhone and
not capitalized
iPad,
ITV
was like the big rumor at the time. And Sky were like, nah, people aren't going to want that. Internet isn't fast enough. And ultimately they were right. And fast forward to today, and you have an actual Sky Glass. Everyone's kind of consuming TV this way. And he was talking about kind of how they see things panning out for the next 10 years. And they kind of painted a picture which was almost exactly reminiscent of that Black Mirror show from last year. Did you see it? It was called Joan is Awful.
No.
It was starring the daughter from Schitt's Creek. And so she lives out her life. She's kind of like, just a normal person. And then she's watching Netflix in the evening, and her life is being played out on screen by Salma Hayek. And so what had happened in the show was a phone, all the cameras and microphones that survey us all day in society, was like getting stuff about her life and then putting it into a TV show. And Salma Hayek, the actor, had sold her likeness, and they just got an AI to kind of like generate these images in real time.
Wow.
Anthony Davis from Sky last week was essentially saying that, you'll be able to do that in the future. He didn't reference that show, but that was my interpretation. So he said that if you play Minecraft, I don't know if you play Minecraft.
Back in the day.
Yeah, so what Minecraft does, it is using AI generated images which are being created in real time almost as you play the game. Now, Minecraft is quite low res. Imagine you move from a Pixar movie where one image is taking a day sometimes to render. You move to a system where AI can start to render those images within seconds. And then remember that TV moving images, 25 frames a second, but imagine you do real high quality content at 60 frames a second. He thinks we can get there in 10 years. And that means that you could do your Black Mirror episode. You could put yourself in the live football game that you're watching. Really, really interesting, but not kind of like pie in the sky stuff. You could actually see this coming on stream very soon.
I just think of the sheer amount of energy required to support such fast rendering.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. That makes me sad. Don't talk about that.
From a sustainability perspective, it's like you have to ask, first of all, like, why are we doing this? Is anyone asking, is this meeting a market demand? That two people really want to create a live AI show of their choosing? Do people really need to be on the inside of a sports stadium as it's like being rendered live? Like, relative to the amount of energy that costs, I have to ask, like, is this the future that we actually desire? Or are there just, executives from up on high saying like, we think we can make a lot of money from this, so we're going to invest a tremendous amount of money in all this technology and not really worry about the carbon footprint of any of it? Because that's what it seems like at the moment.
Yeah, I didn't talk about that so much.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's
good point.
Not so good for upfronts, I suppose.
Speaking of TV, Jag, you had a nice scoop for us last week. A plan has been tabled for Barb to potentially join Origin. What do we know about this, Jag?
Yeah, so we reported this last week. Under the proposal, which I have to say is still definitely under consideration and subject to change, but under the proposal, the default AV report that would be delivered by Origin would include only audience measurement data that meets Media Rating Council standards. That includes data from Barb. Now, Origin would then also produce a second report that brands could opt into viewing that would show all measurable impressions that meet less stringent measurement standards. So that would not include Barb data, but it would include data from Origin's own smaller Kantar-run TV audience panel. They both Origin and Barb use Kantar for their audience panel. So if agreed, and again, that's a big if, but the proposed initiative would then signal the end of a month-long impasse that has left Barb audience data out of the Origin platform, which has been much to the chagrin of people at agencies or probably advertisers themselves that would prefer the highest quality, highest standard TV audience data to be included in Origin. So it's definitely big news if they can actually come to an agreement based off of this proposal. And I also did bring up Kantar, and I thought I would mention as well that there's additional news this week that Kantar Media could be sold to Ipsos, and definitely something to watch. Again, nothing confirmed. Ipsos official statement said, it's just talks where nothing has happened yet. This might collapse. Well, they didn't say that. They didn't say it would collapse. It might collapse.
Hey guys, this might collapse.
They just said that there's nothing confirmed yet. But if so, it would be a boost to Ipsos' own consolidation of its measurement solutions, and because it would then get the TV ratings business and on top of all the other types of measurement work that they do. So that's something to watch as well into the new year.
Yeah. I interviewed the CEO of Kantar Media, Patrick Bahar, in November last year, and kind of politely suggested that, you've been appointed to sell this business, haven't you? And like, no. I'm here to write a big chapter, was the quote. And lo and behold, in January, news starts coming out about potential auction for Kantar Media. And it's interesting that it's taken almost a year now for this. It looks like it's a preferred bidder now, Ipsos, to come forward. Obviously, we'll see about competition concerns going forward because it's yet another consolidating space in media.
Switching to publishing news, an Ofcom report that we alluded to earlier found that the BBC is adding to headwinds facing commercial publishers, especially local publishers. Ofcom expressed some concern that the BBC could act as a substitute for other local news and found that traffic to local news websites had declined over the past year, while BBC's own local news reporting had increased traffic. However, it did fail to necessarily conclude a causal link between those two. That is, commercial local news outlets could be losing traffic for other reasons that we alluded to, and not necessarily just because of the BBC being an alternative. But Omar, we did discuss this a little bit earlier, but I'm curious how concerning you think the BBC's local expansion might be, in particular on local news publishers, especially going forward.
Well, yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said it didn't provide a causal link. I mean, that's what a public interest test would have to determine. And, I take this somewhat personally because in a previous life, I was a local newspaper journalist. And believe me, we weren't not getting scoops because some BBC local reporter was kind of getting ahead of us. It was because there weren't enough of us. It's because our employer NewsQuest was managing decline and was laying off people from the newsroom every year. It's because the jobs market had been bleeding away and is now completely dominated by LinkedIn. And the classifieds market had kind of bled away and has been dominated by Google. These are the companies which have destroyed local publishing in this country. And good luck to them. They haven't done anything wrong, by the way. It's regulation potentially that's to blame, as well as technology and changing consumer habits. And as we said before, about perhaps there is just this general bleeding away in terms of news brands being a publication of choice for a lot of people. But particularly outside of London in the UK, regional news is incredibly important. Who's picking up your bins, who's educating your children, who's providing local mental health services. This is way more important to actually the meat and potatoes of people's lives relative to kind of what national newspapers are obsessed with, woke politics and whatever the obsession of the day is. I would look into whether there should be a commission of providing a trust of regional reporters, organizations, which perhaps existing regional publishers could be a part of in league with the BBC. We've seen some interesting ideas happen over the last 10 years with, Facebook provided money for community news reporters. The BBC kind of has a similar scheme, local democracy reporters that they provide to newsrooms. So, these are effectively publishers already getting some sort of subsidy. So to kind of say that, to just continually blame the BBC for the death of regional publishing, it's just wrong. Speaking of publishing, Jack, tell us what's going on. What's the latest with The Observer? They've called a strike. More people looking to get involved and shoehorn in on this tortoise bid. What's going on?
Yeah, so actually, as we're recording right now, the Guardian Media Group, many of the journalists are on strike. So I'm not exactly sure what the production output is going to look like today for The Guardian. And I believe in the US, the journalists there at The Guardian said that they weren't going to be crossing the picket line. So it's ongoing. It's today, the day we're recording is, and then also tomorrow, the day that the episode will actually come out. So Wednesday and Thursday. It's interesting. So the protest is occurring because the journalists don't want The Observer sold to Tortoise Media. For the longest time, that was sort of an exclusive talks. It is still an exclusive talks between Guardian Media Group and Tortoise Media to sell The Observer. But there has been a new alternative bidder that's emerged saying he would be willing to buy The Observer if exclusive talks were to end at some point. It's businessman Dale Vince. He's a Labour Party donor. And so that could present an alternative solution. I'm not sure if Observer staff would find that more appealing than Tortoise. It's the journalists have made their stance pretty clear that they're unhappy with the sale, but part of the issue is that they felt that the sale has gone through, or the talks at least have gone through very quickly, and there haven't necessarily been alternatives that have been considered. What I will say is that it's pretty clear that, at least from the Guardian Media Group's position, that The Observer is not likely something that they are going to be able to support as a business in the future, in the long term, and that there's going to need to be an alternative arrangement made, whether the Guardian keeps The Observer or sells it, that The Observer is not going to necessarily look the same in 5 years as it would have, 5 years ago. So something is going to need to change, and probably a sale seems like it makes some sense, but I can understand some misgivings about not feeling like included, I suppose, in the discussions, although I suppose that's pretty normal for any employer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think going forward, who's increasingly not a good owner for The Observer is Guardian Media Group.
Right.
It's just over the years, it just hasn't. It's difficult enough for to have a flagship Sunday newspaper brand as it is anyway with the digital environment we live in. But I don't think there's anything imaginative that's happened with The Observer under its ownership on The Guardian, certainly not in the last 10 years. And but at the same time, I do think there are legitimate questions over how this deal has come about between James Harding and, reportedly someone he's been close to over the years, Anna Bateson, who runs Guardian Media Group. So I think there are legitimate questions over, whether the Guardian Media Group should be talking to other potential bidders. But I have to say that Dale Vince, I mean, if you're James Harding, who runs Tortoise, you have to be kind of. This is for this guy Dale Vince to be coming forward as like an alternative proposer. I mean, this is this is like hell for him. Like this guy, I mean, look at this guy's CV. So if the name rings a bell, he kind of owns Forest Green Rovers, this football club, which like they're all vegan.
Okay.
And this guy used to be a New Age traveler, and he's become so rich because he founded renewable energy company, which is, became Ecotricity. And, he's this very kind of, worthy kind of thoughtful industrialist who's like trying to kind of save the world through the green economy. And if you're an observer journalist, you're like, oh, what's not to like about this person? So we'll see what happens with that.
No, it's an interesting point. And I think you're on the money in terms of Guardian Media Group probably isn't the right owner for The Observer. I mean, Guardian also is trying to establish its own brand internationally a lot more as The Guardian. So it's not like people outside of the UK would even have known what The Observer is, but they're probably familiar with The Guardian. And so that brand ends up becoming a bit of sort of dead weight. And it's also a print publication that isn't necessarily transitioning as quickly into a digital environment. It's not clear how they want to integrate. Having its own thing would probably give The Observer a bit of life. It just requires investment that, Tortoise has said that they're wanting to give it. But I understand the fact that it would be a very uncertain future for the different journalists that work at The Observer.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm not trying to make out like The Guardian is particularly doing anything wrong in terms of their strategy.
Right.
They're doing probably what they should be doing, which is, looking to the US, looking to Australia, building a transnational audience of liberal-minded people who really believe in the Guardian's values. I think that's smart. I think that's recognizing that a lot of those liberal-minded people are international in mindset, as Theresa May said, the globalists, the people of nowhere, I'd like to think I'm one of those people. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the strategy. I just think that, where does The Observer fit into that?
Well, it's a good question to end on. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to all of you out there for listening. While this is our last weekly news podcast of the year, we do have a bit more planned before the Christmas holiday, so do stay tuned. And Omar, as always, it's been a total pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jack. Bye-bye.